What would you do if you discovered your husband was planning to kill you on Christmas Eve? Emma Carter found out the truth at 8 months pregnant, alone, in a house decorated with lights her husband would never see. While he was 800 miles away, wrapped in silk sheets with his mistress, plotting how to steal her $2 billion inheritance. But here is what Daniel did not know. The woman he thought was weak, the wife he had spent 5 years breaking down, the pregnant mother he planned to eliminate.
There's nothing anyone can do about it.
She was about to become his worst nightmare. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about a woman who walked into a blizzard to save her baby, who outsmarted a conspiracy designed to destroy her, and who proved that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a mother protecting her child. By the end of this story, you will never see a quiet wife the same way again. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in thick, relentless snowfall. The kind that softened streetlights and silenced the city beneath a false sense of peace. Every sound felt muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. Inside a large, beautifully decorated house in Greenwich, Connecticut, Emma Whitmore Carter sat alone on the leather couch in her living room. One hand rested on her swollen belly while the other clutched her phone, refreshing the screen for what felt like the 100th time that hour. At 8 months pregnant, even breathing felt heavy, but the house around her felt emptier than her lungs. Warm fairy lights glowed on the 12-foot Christmas tree she had decorated entirely by herself. Stockings hung neatly above the fireplace, each one embroidered with care. The smell of cinnamon candles filled the air, mixing with the pine from fresh garlands draped across every mantel. Any stranger walking in would see a picture-perfect holiday home. But Emma knew the truth. These decorations felt like props in a scene that had lost its meaning long ago. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, lighting up the dim room. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest like the Christmas lights on the tree. Maybe Daniel was finally calling. Maybe he missed her. Maybe he remembered that his pregnant wife was spending Christmas Eve alone. But it was not a call, just another brief text message from her husband, Daniel Carter. The message read simply, "Still at the retreat. Weather keeping us longer. We'll call tomorrow. Merry Christmas." Emma stared at the words until they blurred. 14 words. That was all she was worth to him on Christmas Eve. 14 cold, distant, painfully brief words. She scrolled up through their message history, counting the texts she had sent him over the past 3 days. 47 messages from her. 12 responses from him, each one shorter than the last. A successful corporate executive, Daniel always had meetings, deadlines, and excuses. Tonight was no different, except tonight, something felt worse than usual. Emma remembered something her father once told her during one of their last conversations before he passed away. He had looked at her with those knowing eyes and said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The second time is on you." She had seen the signs for months, the late nights that stretched into early mornings, the hushed phone calls that ended abruptly whenever she entered the room, the way Daniel guarded his phone like it contained state secrets, the way his eyes no longer lit up when he looked at her, and the way his hands no longer reached for her belly to feel their baby kick. She had told herself it was stress. His career was demanding after all. He was being considered for a major promotion. She was the one who had suggested moving cities when his company offered him the position in New York. The one who left her job as a corporate lawyer without complaint, believing that supporting her husband was what good wives did. She reminded herself constantly that sacrifice was part of love, but sacrifice was supposed to go both ways. And lately, Emma felt like she was the only one giving anything at all. A familiar ache settled in her chest, heavier than the baby she carried. Her intuition whispered that something was terribly wrong. It was not just loneliness. It was a sharp, crawling dread she could not explain. The kind of feeling that made her want to check every lock on every door. The kind that made her look over her shoulder in her own home. Emma pushed herself up from the couch with effort, her back protesting the movement. She walked slowly to the kitchen to make herself some tea, hoping the warmth might settle her nerves. As she passed Daniel's home office, she noticed something unusual. His laptop was sitting open on the desk. The screen glowed softly in the darkness. Emma froze. Daniel never left his laptop at home. He took it everywhere, treated it like an extension of his own body. She had joked once that he loved that computer more than he loved her. He had not laughed. She should not look. She knew she should not look. But her feet carried her forward anyway, drawn by something stronger than reason. Maybe it was the 47 unanswered texts. Maybe it was the 14 cold words. Maybe it was the months of feeling invisible in her own marriage. Whatever it was, it pushed her through the office door and into the chair in front of the screen. The laptop was open to Daniel's email. The most recent message was from someone named Lydia Brennan. The subject line read, "Missing you already." Emma's heart began to pound. Her finger trembled over the trackpad as she clicked the message open. What she found was worse than she had imagined. The first layer was a thread of messages with Lydia that stretched back 6 months. Messages filled with explicit photos. Messages that said, "I love you." Messages that discussed their future together in detail, including where they would travel after everything was settled. Emma felt her stomach lurch. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. She forced herself to keep reading. The second layer was financial. Hotel receipts from luxury resorts she had never visited. Jewelry purchases totaling over $45,000 for pieces she had never received. Restaurant bills from places Daniel claimed he went with clients. All of it for Lydia, all of it paid for with money from their joint accounts. But it was the third layer that turned Emma's blood to ice. There was an email thread with a lawyer she did not recognize. The subject line was, "Whitmore Inheritance Timeline." Emma clicked it open and began to read. The conversation discussed something called a contingency plan. It referenced Emma's 35th birthday, which was 3 months away. It mentioned her inheritance from her late father's estate, which she had kept private from almost everyone, including Daniel, or so she had thought. The lawyer wrote about scenarios where a spouse might become incapacitated or might need to be declared mentally unfit. The final email mentioned pregnancy complications and how they could provide cover for various outcomes. Emma read that last sentence 3 times before its meaning fully registered. This was not just an affair. Her husband was not just cheating on her. Daniel and this woman were planning something far worse. They were planning how to take her inheritance. And from the language in these emails, they did not care if she survived the process. Her hands flew to her belly as a sharp pain shot through her midsection. Contractions. Stress-induced, she told herself. Not real labor. Not yet. She breathed through the pain slowly, counting to 10, then 20, then 30. Her phone buzzed with a notification from her pregnancy app. The cheerful message read, "Week 34. Your baby is the size of a cantaloupe. Time to start nesting." Emma would have laughed if she was not so terrified. Nesting. She did not need to start nesting. She needed to start running. The contractions eased, but the fear did not. Emma stood up from the desk on shaking legs and walked back to the living room. She sank onto the couch and stared at the Christmas tree, its lights blinking happily, completely unaware that the world had just shattered into a million pieces. She thought about calling the police. But what would she say? "My husband is having an affair, and I found some suspicious emails." They would ask for proof of a crime. She had speculation and fear, but nothing concrete. Nothing that would make anyone believe that a charming, successful executive was capable of harming his pregnant wife. She thought about confronting Daniel, but that would only warn him. He would delete the evidence. He would spin some story that made her look paranoid and crazy. Pregnant women were emotional. Everyone knew that. He would use her own condition against her. No, she could not confront him. She could not call for help. She could not stay here and wait for whatever they had planned. Emma realized with crystal clarity that she had only one option. She had to disappear. She had to vanish before Daniel knew that she knew. She had to gather evidence from somewhere safe. And then, when she was ready, she would destroy them both. The pregnant wife they thought they could discard, like garbage, was about to become their worst nightmare. 800 miles away in the snow-capped mountains of Aspen, Christmas felt very different for Daniel Carter. The 5-star resort glowed with golden light as wealthy guests moved through polished hallways in designer clothes. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors. A pianist played carols in the grand lobby while servers circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. Everything sparkled. Everything shone. Everything cost more money than most people made in a year. Daniel stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the resort's finest suite, watching the snow fall over the mountains. A glass of 30-year-old scotch rested in his hand. Behind him, stretched across a king-size bed covered in silk sheets, lay Lydia Brennan. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful. Perfect blonde hair that fell in waves across the pillows. Flawless skin that had been maintained by the best dermatologist money could buy. A body sculpted by personal trainers and yoga retreats in Bali. At 31, Lydia looked like she had stepped out of the pages of a fashion magazine. Her Instagram account, where she had 2 million followers, certainly suggested as much. Lydia propped herself up on one elbow and smiled at Daniel. The red silk robe she wore slipped strategically off one shoulder. Everything about her was calculated to please. Everything about her was designed to make men feel powerful. "How is the weather out there?" she asked, her voice like honey. Daniel turned from the window and smiled back. "Still snowing. Looks like we might be stuck here another day or two." "What a tragedy." Lydia laughed, the sound light and musical. "I suppose we will just have to find ways to entertain ourselves." Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. His smile flickered when he saw Emma's name. Another text message, another plea for attention, another reminder of the life he was so desperate to escape. "Let me guess," Lydia said, her tone shifting slightly. "The pregnant wife again." Daniel sighed and flipped the phone face down on the dresser. "She keeps asking when I am coming home. I told her the retreat is running long because of weather." "Poor thing must be so lonely," Lydia said. The words sounded sympathetic, but her eyes glittered with something cold. Spending Christmas Eve all by herself, 8 months pregnant. It really is sad when you think about it. Daniel heard the cruelty beneath her words and felt a brief twist of something in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or just the inconvenience of having loose ends. He pushed the feeling down and took a long drink of scotch. "She will be fine," he said. "She has everything she needs at the house." Lydia sat up fully now, letting the robe fall away as she reached for her own glass of wine. "Does she, though? Because from what you have told me, what Emma needs is a husband who actually loves her. And that is the one thing you cannot give her, Daniel. Not anymore." Daniel crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "You know, I never really loved her. Not the way she wanted me to. I thought I could learn to. I thought the marriage would be enough. But then I met you and everything changed." This was not entirely true, but it was the version of events that made Daniel feel better about his choices. The truth was far more complicated. The truth was that Daniel had married Emma because she seemed like the perfect wife for an ambitious man climbing the corporate ladder. Beautiful enough to impress clients, smart enough to hold her own at dinner parties, quiet enough not to demand too much attention. He had not known about her inheritance when they met. Emma had kept that secret carefully guarded, wanting to be loved for herself rather than her money. It was almost touching, really. Almost tragic. Daniel had discovered the truth 6 months ago, quite by accident. A piece of mail from a law firm addressed to Emma. A phone call she thought he did not overhear. A quick search through her private documents while she was at a prenatal appointment. What he found had changed everything. Emma Whitmore Carter was not just the daughter of some minor businessman who had passed away. She was the sole heir to Whitmore Industries, a tech empire worth over $2 billion. The inheritance was held in trust until her 35th birthday, which was exactly 3 months away. $2 billion. Enough to solve every problem Daniel had ever faced. Enough to cover the $47 million in debt he had accumulated through failed cryptocurrency investments. Enough to save him from the embezzlement charges that would destroy him if his company ever audited too closely. Enough to give him the life he truly deserved. But there was a catch. The inheritance came with conditions. If Emma died while married, her spouse would inherit everything. But if they divorced before the inheritance activated, Daniel would get nothing except whatever he could negotiate in a settlement. And Emma's prenuptial agreement, which she had insisted upon despite his protests, was ironclad. In a divorce, he would walk away with barely a fraction of what he needed. The solution had presented itself through Lydia, who was far more than just a beautiful Instagram influencer. Lydia had experience with situations like this. 2 previous marriages to wealthy men, both of whom had died under convenient circumstances. 1 heart attack that came out of nowhere. 1 hiking accident that seemed just a little too perfect. Both times, Lydia had emerged richer and entirely above suspicion. She had been very clear about what needed to happen with Emma. And Daniel, desperate and greedy and rationalizing every step, had agreed. Lydia's voice pulled him back to the present. 3 more months, she said. Then her birthday comes. The inheritance activates. And then we execute the plan. Daniel nodded slowly. The word execute felt heavy on his tongue whenever Lydia used it. You are sure it will look natural? Lydia smiled, that cold, calculating smile that had first attracted him and now sometimes made him nervous. Pregnancy complications happen all the time, darling, especially when a woman is under extreme stress. The kind of stress that might come from, say, discovering her husband's affair at the worst possible moment. The kind that could trigger a tragic outcome for both mother and child. Daniel felt that twist in his chest again. Harder this time. He told himself it was just nerves, just the reality of what they were planning settling into his bones. He was not a murderer, not really. He was just a man who wanted what he deserved, a man who had been trapped in a loveless marriage, a man who had finally found someone who understood him. He finished his scotch in one long swallow and reached for Lydia. She pulled him down onto the bed, her lips finding his, her hands pushing away his concerns. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the resort, a clock chimed midnight. Christmas Day had officially arrived. And while Daniel Carter celebrated with champagne and passion in a luxury suite, his pregnant wife was making plans of her own. Plans that would turn everything Daniel thought he knew upside down. Plans that would expose every secret he was trying to bury. He just did not know it yet. Emma worked quickly in the darkness of her home, knowing that every minute mattered. She grabbed a small duffel bag from the closet and began packing with trembling hands. 3 changes of clothes, comfortable shoes, her passport, the $500 in cash she kept hidden in a shoebox for emergencies, anything she could carry without drawing attention. She deliberately left her phone on the coffee table. Daniel could track it, and she needed him to think she was still here. She left her credit cards too. Every transaction would create a trail. Every purchase would tell him exactly where she was. As she moved through the house, gathering supplies, Emma felt something shifting inside her. Not the baby, though Grace was certainly restless tonight. Something deeper, something that had been sleeping for 5 years and was finally waking up. She used to be a shark in the courtroom. That was what her colleagues called her during her years as a corporate lawyer. Sharp, relentless, unafraid, she had won cases that everyone said were unwinnable. She had faced down opponents twice her age and 3 times her experience. She had been someone. Then she met Daniel, and slowly, without even realizing it, she had made herself smaller, quieter, less threatening. She had dimmed her own light because her brightness made him uncomfortable. No more. The woman Daniel thought he had married was a fiction, a performance, a carefully constructed role designed to keep the peace. The real Emma Whitmore was still in there, buried beneath years of compromise and sacrifice. And tonight, for the sake of her daughter, that woman was coming back. Emma paused at the front door and looked back at the Christmas tree one final time. All those lights, all that false cheer, all that effort she had put into creating a holiday that Daniel could not even be bothered to attend. Next year would be different. Next year, she would spend Christmas with her daughter, surrounded by people who actually loved her. And Daniel would spend his Christmas learning what it felt like to lose everything. She stepped outside into the blizzard. The cold hit her immediately, biting through her coat and making her gasp. The snow was falling so thickly that she could barely see the streetlights at the end of her driveway. Every instinct told her to go back inside, to wait until morning, to find a safer time. But there was no safe time. Not anymore. Not with Daniel planning whatever he was planning. Every hour she stayed in that house was an hour closer to whatever contingency scenario they had discussed in those emails. Emma pulled her coat tighter and began walking. She made it 3 blocks before she found what she was looking for, a payphone, standing like a relic from another era on the corner of Main Street. Most people assumed payphones did not exist anymore, but Emma had noticed this one months ago during one of her walks through the neighborhood. She had filed the information away without knowing why. Now she knew. She stepped into the small shelter around the phone, grateful for the brief reprieve from the wind. Her fingers were already numb as she lifted the receiver and dialed a number she had memorized years ago but never expected to use. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. The voice was calm and professional despite the late hour. Holloway Network. How can we help you? Emma took a deep breath. My name is Emma. I am 8 months pregnant. My husband is planning to hurt me. I need somewhere safe to go. Tonight. There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman's voice softened slightly. Emma, can you tell me your location? Emma gave the address of the payphone. She answered questions about her condition, her pregnancy, her immediate safety. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, the woman spoke again. A van will be there in 20 minutes. Gray minivan, no markings. The driver's name is Patricia. She will take you somewhere safe. Do you understand? I understand, Emma, the voice said. You are making the right choice. Whatever happens next, remember that. You are protecting yourself and your baby. That is what matters. The line went dead. No. Emma hung up the receiver and huddled in the shelter, watching the snow fall and trying not to think about what would happen when Daniel discovered she was gone. He would be angry. He would be scared. He might even be relieved, at least at first, until he realized what her disappearance meant for his plans. The van arrived exactly 20 minutes later. A gray minivan that looked like something a soccer mom would drive, completely unremarkable in every way. The side door slid open and a kind-faced woman with graying hair smiled at Emma from the driver's seat. You must be Emma. Mom, the woman said. I'm Patricia. Let us get you somewhere warm. Emma climbed into the van and Patricia handed her a blanket and a burner phone still sealed in plastic packaging. First rule, Patricia said as she pulled away from the curb. The old Emma is dead. From this moment forward, you are someone else. Until you are ready to resurrect her, that is. Emma looked down at the burner phone in her hands. Such a small thing. Such a simple device. But it represented everything she was leaving behind and everything she was about to become. Through the van's windows, she watched her neighborhood disappear into the storm. The houses with their Christmas lights, the snowmen on lawns, the warm glow of windows where families gathered together on this most sacred of nights. She was leaving all of it behind, walking away from her home, her marriage, her entire life. But she was walking towards something too: safety, freedom, justice, and eventually revenge. The van drove through the night, heading north through the blizzard toward a place Emma had never been. A safe house run by women who understood exactly what she was facing. A sanctuary where she could rest, recover, and plan her next move. Behind her, the snow continued to fall over her empty house. By morning, every footprint would be erased. Every trace of her departure would vanish beneath fresh powder. And when Daniel finally tried to find her, there would be nothing left to find. Christmas morning arrived with an unsettling stillness that seemed to spread across the entire neighborhood like a held breath, like the calm before a storm that no one saw coming. The snow had stopped falling sometime before dawn, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that sparkled under the pale winter sun. Icicles hung from gutters like frozen tears. Frost painted delicate patterns on windows. Children in nearby houses were waking up to stockings stuffed with presents, their excited shrieks echoing down quiet streets as parents captured memories on camera phones. But at the Carter residence, no one stirred. No lights flickered on. No child's laughter rang out. Just silence so thick it felt wrong. Margaret Sullivan noticed it first. Maggie, as everyone called her, had been watching the Carter house for months on behalf of her late friend's daughter. As Emma's godmother and the attorney who managed the Whitmore family trust, she had grown increasingly concerned about the man Emma had married. Something about Daniel Carter had never sat right with her. His smile was too practiced. His charm was too calculated. And the way Emma's spark had dimmed over the past 5 years made Maggie's stomach turn with suspicion. When she drove past the house at 10 in the morning and noticed that the curtains were still drawn and no lights were on, her concerns sharpened into alarm. She tried calling Emma's cell phone. No answer. She tried the house line. No answer. She drove around the block and parked across the street, watching for any sign of movement. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Nothing. Absolute nothing. By noon, Maggie's concern had become genuine fear. The kind of fear that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. She called the non-emergency police line and requested a welfare check, citing her role as the family attorney and her inability to reach the pregnant homeowner. 2 officers arrived within 30 minutes, their boots leaving dark impressions in the fresh snow as they approached the front door. They knocked repeatedly. They called out. They checked windows. Nothing. The front door was locked, but the back door was not. One officer entered while the other stayed outside following procedure. His hand rested on his weapon, just in case. Inside, everything looked eerily preserved, as if time had stopped mid-breath on Christmas Eve. The Christmas tree still sparkled in the corner, its lights blinking cheerfully in the silence. A cruel mockery of celebration. Wrapped presents sat neatly underneath, the paper still crisp and untouched. Gift tags bearing Emma's careful handwriting read, "To Daniel with love." The irony was suffocating. In the kitchen, the makings of Christmas dinner sat abandoned on the counter. A half-prepared ham turning gray at the edges, vegetables that had been washed but not chopped, now wilting in their colander. A mixing bowl filled with ingredients for what might have been cookies or pie, the butter softened and separating. Emma had been planning a celebration for a husband who was 800 miles away, wrapped in another woman's arms. The officer moved through the house carefully, calling Emma's name at every turn. In the living room, he found her phone sitting on the coffee table. The screen was dark, the battery long dead. 47 unread messages from a wife who had finally stopped waiting for responses. Her purse hung on a hook by the door, but her coat and boots were missing. In the bedroom, the picture became more concerning. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled as if someone had slept restlessly or not at all. Prenatal vitamins lined up on the dresser had not been touched since the night before. A window was slightly ajar, letting in the cold December air. On the nightstand, a pregnancy book lay open to a chapter titled "Preparing for Baby's Arrival." Emma had highlighted passages about bonding with your partner during the final weeks. The officer checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding space. He checked the basement and the garage. He checked the backyard, where undisturbed snow told him no one had walked there in hours. Emma Whitmore Carter was gone, vanished without explanation on Christmas Eve. 8 months pregnant, alone and vulnerable in freezing weather. A woman carrying a child who would never know the danger they had both been in. What had begun as a welfare check became a missing persons case within the hour. Given the circumstances, a pregnant woman disappearing in a blizzard, it was immediately classified as high priority. Red flags everywhere. Detectives arrived by 2 in the afternoon. Crime scene technicians followed. Yellow tape went up around the property, bright against the white snow. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering to each other in horrified tones. Some clutched coffee mugs. Others held their children a little tighter. "Where is the husband?" one woman asked her neighbor. "Why is he not here?" No one had an answer, but everyone had suspicions. Maggie Sullivan stood apart from the crowd, her face carefully composed despite the turmoil inside her. She had suspected something was wrong in Emma's marriage for months. The weight Emma had lost, the light that had left her eyes, the way she flinched when Daniel raised his voice. Now her worst fears seemed to be materializing before her eyes. But beneath her concern, another emotion was stirring. Suspicion. Cold, calculated suspicion. Because Maggie had hired a private investigator 3 months ago to look into Daniel Carter. And what Marcus Webb had found painted a picture of a man far more dangerous than anyone suspected. Wherever Emma was, Maggie prayed she was safe, and she silently promised her late friend, Emma's father, that she would do whatever it took to protect his daughter, even if that meant destroying Daniel Carter in the process, piece by piece, until nothing remained. 800 miles away in a luxury resort suite that cost more per night than most families spent on their entire Christmas, Daniel's laughter died in his throat the moment he finally looked at his phone. He and Lydia had spent Christmas morning in bed, ordering room service and ignoring the outside world. Champagne for breakfast, strawberries dipped in chocolate, silk sheets tangled around their bodies as they celebrated a holiday that belonged to another woman entirely. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon when Daniel finally reached for his phone to check his messages, expecting nothing more than holiday greetings from colleagues and perhaps another plaintive text from Emma. Another message he would ignore. Another cry for attention he would dismiss. What he found made his blood run cold. 47 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 216 text messages, a dozen news alerts. His phone had been screaming for hours, and he had been too busy with Lydia to notice. His hands shook as he opened the first headline. Pregnant heiress missing on Christmas Eve. Husband unreachable. Police launch investigation. The story included a photo of Emma, her gentle smile and kind eyes staring at him from the screen like an accusation. Beneath the image, her name was printed in bold letters. Emma Whitmore Carter, heir to the Whitmore Industries fortune, vanished from her Greenwich home sometime during the Christmas Eve blizzard. Her husband, Daniel Carter, has not returned police calls. Sources close to the investigation report that Mr. Carter's whereabouts remain unknown. Lydia noticed the change in his expression and leaned over to read the screen, her blonde hair brushing against his shoulder. Her face went pale, not with concern for Emma, but with fear for herself, for her reputation, for her carefully curated Instagram image of luxury and success. "What does this mean?" she whispered. "For us, for your reputation, for what by reputation? Are they going to find out about us?" Daniel barely heard her. A dull panic was spreading through his entire body as guilt surged to the surface, tangled with dread and self-preservation. He began calculating immediately. Where had he been when Emma disappeared? What was his alibi? How would this look to the police? How would this look to the media? How would this look to Emma's lawyers when the inheritance came into question? He tried calling Emma's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, cheerful and warm, made his stomach lurch. He tried calling the house. No answer. He tried calling the police department, his fingers fumbling over the numbers twice before he got them right. The conversation that followed was terse and unhelpful. Yes, they were investigating. No, they could not tell him anything yet. Yes, they would need to speak with him as soon as possible. Where was he currently located? Daniel gave them the name of the resort with a sinking feeling in his stomach. 800 miles away from his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve, at a luxury ski resort with another woman, while Emma vanished into a blizzard, alone, carrying his child. This looked bad. This looked very, very bad. Around him, the resort continued its festive celebrations. Music played, guests laughed, champagne flowed. Children ran through hallways wearing new Christmas sweaters. Families gathered for holiday dinners. But Daniel felt none of the warmth he had enjoyed just hours ago. The suite that had felt like a paradise now felt like a prison cell. The silence he had been ignoring for months was no longer convenient. It was loud, public, and threatening to destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. Every unanswered text, every ignored phone call, every excuse he had invented to avoid coming home. It was all going to come out. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret. He turned to Lydia, his voice sharp with fear. "We need to get our story straight. Right now, before they start asking questions we cannot answer." Lydia nodded, already calculating. But deep in her cold, predatory mind, she was also considering another possibility. If this went wrong, truly wrong, she would need an exit strategy. She had survived 2 dead husbands in their investigations. She would survive this too, even if Daniel did not. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long dirt road in rural Vermont, surrounded by bare maple trees and gentle hills still covered in Christmas snow. No signs marked the driveway. No address numbers were visible from the road. To anyone passing by, it looked like just another forgotten property in the countryside. That was the point. Emma had arrived 3 days ago, exhausted and terrified, and barely able to keep her eyes open. Patricia had driven her through the night, taking back roads and small highways to avoid any chance of being followed. They had stopped only twice, once for gas at a station with no security cameras, and once so Emma could use a bathroom that did not require her to go inside a building. By the time they reached the safe house, the sun was rising over the frozen landscape, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. Emma had never seen anything so beautiful, or felt so relieved to be anywhere in her entire life. Rose Holloway had been waiting at the door. She was a tall woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and steady hands. Hands that had delivered hundreds of babies. Hands that had held countless women as they sobbed through the worst moments of their lives. A former OB/GYN who had traded her mainstream medical practice for something more personal. Something that helped women who had nowhere else to turn. Women like Emma. Dr. Rose ran this network of safe houses across New England, funded by anonymous donors who believed that every woman deserved a chance to escape danger. The network had no website, No phone number in any directory. You could only find it if someone who had been saved by it decided to trust you with its existence. The first few days were a blur of rest and recovery. Emma slept more than she had in months, the stress of her marriage finally releasing its grip on her body like a fist unclenching. She ate simple meals prepared by the house's small staff. Hearty soups, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden that had been preserved for winter. Food that tasted like kindness. She underwent medical checkups that confirmed her pregnancy was progressing normally despite everything. Her blood pressure had been dangerously high when she arrived. 3 days later, it was almost normal. Amazing what leaving a toxic situation could do for your health. And slowly, carefully, Emma began to process what had happened. What she had escaped. What might have happened if she had stayed. She was not alone in the house. 3 other women lived there temporarily, each with her own story of escape, each with scars, visible and invisible. Jenny was 26, a former kindergarten teacher with freckles and a nervous laugh. She had fled her ex-boyfriend after the violence escalated from threats to action. He had fractured her cheekbone 2 weeks before Christmas, told her she made him do it, told her no one would ever love her the way he did. She still flinched when anyone raised their voice. Martha was 52, a mother of 3 grown children, finally leaving a marriage that had been slowly killing her spirit for 3 decades. Her husband had never hit her, but the psychological abuse had been just as devastating. He had controlled every dollar she spent, criticized every meal she cooked, made her feel worthless, stupid, lucky that anyone would put up with her. She was learning to make her own decisions for the first time in her adult life. Sarah was only 19, pregnant like Emma, and too scared to say much about what she had escaped from. She had bruises on her arms that she tried to hide with long sleeves. She cried in her sleep. Emma recognized the look in her eyes, the look of someone who was still waiting for the monster to find her. Emma helped where she could. She listened when the others needed to talk. She held Jenny's hand one night when nightmares made sleep impossible, when the terror of the past crashed into the uncertainty of the present. She helped Martha write a letter to the adult children she had left behind, explaining why their mother had finally chosen herself. These moments reminded Emma what she was fighting for, not just her own survival, not just her daughter's safety, but the right of every woman to live without fear. The right to feel safe in her own home. The right to exist without someone trying to diminish her, control her, or destroy her. On her 4th day at the safe house, Emma finally felt strong enough to make contact with the outside world. Strong enough to fight back. Maggie Sullivan arrived that evening, having driven 6 hours through winter roads to reach the farmhouse. The reunion was emotional in ways neither woman expected. Maggie had known Emma since she was a child, had watched her grow from a stubborn little girl who argued with everyone into a brilliant lawyer who could argue circles around opponents twice her age. Then she had watched that brilliant woman fade away inside an unhappy marriage, watched the fire in her eyes dim, watched her apologize for everything, even things that were not her fault, watched her become a shadow of who she used to be. "You should have called me sooner," Maggie said, holding Emma's hands in her own. Her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay composed. "I knew something was wrong. I should have pushed harder. I should have made you listen." Emma shook her head. "I would not have listened. I needed to see it for myself." "That is how these things work, Maggie. We do not leave until we are ready to leave. And we are not ready until something breaks inside us that cannot be fixed." Maggie had not come alone. With her was Marcus Webb, a private investigator she had hired 3 months earlier when her suspicions about Daniel first crystallized into genuine concern. Marcus was 36, a former FBI agent with a sarcastic sense of humor that masked a sharp intelligence. He had a reputation for finding things that people wanted to stay hidden. Buried secrets, hidden assets, dangerous patterns. "So," Marcus said, settling into a chair by the fireplace like he owned the place, "good news and bad news. Which do you want first?" Emma almost smiled. It was the first time she had felt like smiling in weeks. "Give me the bad news. I am already at rock bottom. It can only go up from here." Marcus pulled out a thick folder and began laying out documents on the coffee table, like a poker player revealing his hand. "The bad news is that your husband is definitely a criminal. The worst news is that he is not a smart criminal, which means he has made a lot of mistakes that leave evidence everywhere. Even worse news is that his girlfriend, Lydia Brennan, is very smart, which means she has been covering his mistakes almost as fast as he makes them. Emma leaned forward, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Grace kicked, as if she were listening too. What kind of criminal? The list was longer than she expected, much longer. Embezzlement from his company, over $47 million in personal debt from failed cryptocurrency investments that his partners knew nothing about, fraudulent documentation submitted to banks and investors, tax evasion on a scale that would make the IRS weep with joy, and most concerning of all, emails that suggested he was planning something far worse than financial crimes. "I've found the same emails you found," Marcus continued, his sarcastic tone dropping into something more serious. "The ones about your inheritance, the ones discussing contingency scenarios, the ones that used words like incapacitated and complications in timing. Emma, I do not think your husband just wants your money. I think he wants you out of the way permanently. And I think Lydia Brennan is the one who taught him how to make that happen." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Emma had suspected this. She had read those emails herself on Christmas Eve. The horror of discovery mixing with the terror of understanding. But hearing it confirmed by an investigator who had spent 15 years at the FBI made it real in a way that her own fears had not. This was not paranoia. This was not pregnancy hormones. This was not her being dramatic. Her husband wanted her dead, and he had been planning it for months. Maggie squeezed her hand. "We have evidence, Emma. Financial crimes, clear proof of the affair, and these emails that suggest intent. We can take this to the authorities. We can make him pay." Emma felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time since Christmas Eve. A tiny flame in the darkness. "We can get him arrested?" Marcus and Maggie exchanged a look that made Emma's hope falter. The kind of look that meant bad news was coming. "That is where it gets complicated," Marcus said. "We can definitely nail him on the financial crimes. The embezzlement alone should put him away for years. The affair is embarrassing but not illegal. But the murder plot stuff, that is all circumstantial. Those emails could be explained away as dark humor or hypothetical discussions. Without concrete proof that they were actually planning to harm you, any halfway decent lawyer could get that thrown out. And Daniel has more than halfway decent lawyers. He has the best money can buy. So what do we do?" Maggie spoke carefully, choosing each word. "First, we file emergency divorce papers. We freeze his access to any joint accounts. We establish that you are alive and mentally competent, because right now Daniel is on every news channel in America crying about his missing wife and suggesting that you might have had some kind of breakdown." Emma's blood went cold. "He is saying I am crazy?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "He is not using that word specifically. His PR team is too smart for that. But he is heavily implying that pregnancy has affected your mental state, that you have been paranoid and erratic, that you might have wandered off in the blizzard in a state of confusion." He actually used the phrase hormonal episode in one interview. The sympathy play is working. People feel sorry for him, the poor, worried husband whose pregnant wife has mental health issues. Emma felt rage building in her chest, hot and powerful. A fire that had been dormant for 5 years, suddenly roaring back to life. She had spent half a decade making herself smaller to accommodate Daniel's ego. 5 years of being careful, being quiet, being whatever he needed her to be. 5 years of shrinking herself so he could feel bigger. 5 years of apologizing for existing. 5 years of believing that if she just tried harder, if she just loved more, if she just gave more, the marriage would work. And now he was repaying that sacrifice by painting her as an unstable woman who had lost her mind, by using her pregnancy against her, by turning her love for their daughter into evidence of mental illness. "He cannot get away with this," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "He cannot just lie about me to the whole world. He cannot just rewrite our entire history to make himself the victim. He will not," Maggie promised. "But we need to be smart about this. Smarter than him. Smarter than Lydia. If we move too fast, if we show our hand too early, he will find a way to spin it. He will hire better lawyers. He will bury evidence. He will find judges who owe him favors. We need to build an airtight case. We need evidence that even the best lawyer in the world cannot explain away. And we need you to stay hidden and safe until we have everything we need." Emma looked around the farmhouse, at the simple furniture and the warm fire and the women who had found shelter here. Women who had survived things that should have destroyed them. Women who were learning to live again. She looked down at her belly, where her daughter was growing stronger every day, where Grace was waiting to be born into a world that Emma was determined to make safe for her. How long? Maggie hesitated. A few weeks, maybe a month. Long enough to gather what we need and coordinate with the right people. Long enough to make sure that when we strike, Daniel and Lydia never see it coming. A month felt like an eternity, but Emma had waited 5 years to escape a dying marriage. 5 years of hoping things would change. 5 years of believing lies. She could wait a few more weeks to ensure her freedom was permanent, to ensure her daughter would never know the fear that had consumed her mother, to ensure that Daniel Carter would pay for every single thing he had done. "Tell me what I need to do," she said, "and I will do it." For the first time in 5 years, Emma Whitmore Carter felt like herself again. Not Daniel's wife, not a victim, not a woman who apologized for taking up space. A fighter, a mother, a Whitmore. And Whitmores did not lose. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of planning and waiting, of hope building slowly, brick by brick, only to be torn down in ways Emma never saw coming. Emma threw herself into the work of building her case with the same intensity she had once brought to the courtroom. She documented everything she could remember about Daniel's suspicious behavior over the past year. Every late night he claimed was work. Every phone call that ended abruptly when she walked into the room. Every time he turned his screen away from her. Every lie she had swallowed because the alternative was too painful to consider. She wrote detailed timelines of his unexplained absences, cross-referencing them with credit card statements Marcus had obtained through methods she decided not to ask about. The pattern was damning. Hotel rooms in cities where Daniel had no business meetings. Restaurant bills for two when he claimed to be dining with clients. Jewelry purchases that never appeared on Emma's finger. 6 months of betrayal, documented in spreadsheets and receipts. 6 months of being made a fool while she decorated nurseries and planned a future that was never going to happen. Meanwhile, the outside world was going mad. The story of the missing pregnant heiress had captured national attention in ways none of them had anticipated. Emma Whitmore Carter, heir to a $2 billion fortune, vanished on Christmas Eve. It was the kind of story that cable news networks live for. Mystery, money, a beautiful pregnant woman, a husband with no alibi. Daniel had hired the best public relations firm money could buy, and they were earning every penny. He appeared on morning shows and evening news programs, always wearing the same expression of worried grief. The concerned husband, the father-to-be who just wanted his wife to come home safely. He cried on camera, actual tears rolling down his cheeks as he described the nursery they had painted together. The Christmas presents still wrapped under the tree, waiting for Emma to open them. The baby clothes they had picked out during happier times. He spoke about his hopes for their daughter, about how he prayed every night that Emma and the baby were safe somewhere, about how he blamed himself for working too much, for not being there when she needed him. It was a masterful performance, Academy Award worthy, and America was buying every word of it. Social media overflowed with sympathy for the grieving husband. Women posted about how they wished their partners loved them the way Daniel clearly loved Emma. Prayer chains formed. Candlelight vigils were organized. A hashtag called Bring Emma Home trended for 3 consecutive days. He mentioned nothing about Lydia Brennan, and when a few brave reporters asked about rumors of an affair, his PR team shut down the questions immediately. They threatened lawsuits. They called the accusations irresponsible journalism during a family crisis. They made anyone who questioned Daniel's devotion look like a monster. Emma watched these performances on the small television in the farmhouse common room, her anger growing with each passing day. Her hands would clench into fists. Her blood pressure would spike. Dr. Rose had to remind her more than once that stress was not good for the baby. But how could she not be stressed? How could she sit calmly while the man who wanted her dead was being treated like a saint? While the whole country felt sorry for the husband who was planning her murder? Daniel was good at this. He had always been good at making people believe whatever he wanted them to believe. That was how he had fooled Emma for 5 years. That was how he had convinced her to give up her career, her friends, her identity. He was a con artist in a custom-tailored suit and his greatest con was making the world think he was a victim. But Emma was gathering ammunition. Every day, Marcus brought new evidence. Every day, the case against Daniel grew stronger. And when the time was right, when she had everything she needed, she would show the world who Daniel Carter really was. The mask would come off, and everyone who had cried for him would see the monster underneath. The breakthrough came on Emma's 16th day at the safe house. Marcus called in the early evening, his voice carrying an energy she had not heard before. Excitement, triumph, the sound of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Emma," he said through the burner phone, "are you sitting down? Because what I am about to tell you changes everything." Emma lowered herself onto the couch, one hand on her belly. Grace was kicking tonight, restless and active. "What did you find?" "Lydia Brennan's sealed court records from her previous marriages." Emma's heart began to race. "How did you get those?" "You do not want to know. But here is what matters. Both of her former husbands died under circumstances that were never fully explained. And when I say never fully explained, I mean the kind of suspicious that should have led to murder charges. Tell me everything." Marcus laid out the evidence with the precision of the FBI agent he used to be. Husband number one was Richard Crawford, 42 years old, successful real estate developer. No history of heart problems. Ran marathons. Did CrossFit 5 days a week. Passed every physical with flying colors. One night, 6 months after marrying Lydia, he had a massive heart attack in his sleep, dead before the ambulance arrived. Lydia inherited $3.5 million in a beachfront property in Malibu. Husband number two was Thomas Bennett, 51 years old, avid hiker who had climbed mountains on 4 continents, knew the trails around his Colorado home like the back of his hand. 8 months after marrying Lydia, he fell off a cliff during a routine afternoon hike. The fall was ruled an accident despite several inconsistencies in the evidence. Lydia inherited $4.2 million and a portfolio of tech stocks worth twice that. Both men had been wealthy. Both had recently changed their wills to benefit Lydia. Both had life insurance policies taken out just weeks before their deaths, policies that Lydia had encouraged them to purchase. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice crackling with intensity. "This is the pattern that proves she is not just a gold digger, she is a black widow, a serial killer who marries rich men and makes their deaths look natural. If we can connect this to what they are planning for you, we have a case that any prosecutor would love to take on. Federal charges, multiple counts, the kind of case that makes careers." Emma felt genuine hope for the first time since this nightmare began, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the farmhouse fireplace. "Can we take this to the police? To the FBI?" "That is exactly what we are going to do," Maggie said, joining the call from her office in Connecticut. "Your friend Charlotte Price works in the district attorney's office. She has agreed to review everything we have and advise us on the best path forward. She is expecting our call tomorrow morning." Charlotte, the name hit Emma like a punch to the chest. She had not spoken to Charlotte in almost 3 years, not since their falling out over Daniel. Charlotte had been Emma's best friend in law school. They had studied together, laughed together, cried together during finals week. They had been bridesmaids at each other's imaginary future weddings, back when both of them believed in fairy tales. Then Emma had started dating Daniel. Charlotte had seen something wrong from the very beginning. She had noticed how Daniel always needed to know where Emma was, how he made subtle comments that chipped away at her confidence, how Emma started apologizing for things that were not her fault, how she stopped calling as often, how she started making excuses for his behavior. Charlotte had tried to warn her, gently at first, then more directly. She had used words like controlling and manipulative and narcissistic. She had begged Emma to slow down, to wait, to really think about what she was getting into. Emma had not listened. She had been in love. She had been certain that Charlotte was just jealous, just overprotective, just incapable of seeing what Emma saw in Daniel. They had argued, terrible friendship-ending arguments where Emma said things she could never take back, where she accused Charlotte of trying to sabotage her happiness, where she chose Daniel over a decade of friendship without hesitation. Charlotte had been right about everything, and Emma had thrown away one of the best relationships of her life to defend a man who was now planning to kill her. The guilt was almost unbearable, but now Charlotte was willing to help, despite everything, despite the hurtful words and the years of silence. and the smug certainty Emma had shown when she married Daniel anyway. That was the kind of friend Charlotte had always been, the kind who showed up when you needed her, even if you did not deserve it. Charlotte called back within 48 hours. Emma answered on the first ring, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Emma," Charlotte said, and her voice was warm, warmer than Emma had any right to expect. "I've been going through everything Marcus sent over, the financial records, the emails, the pattern with Lydia's previous marriages. I have to tell you something." Emma held her breath. "This is solid." Charlotte's voice was firm with professional conviction. "This is really, really solid. The pattern with Lydia is textbook serial killer behavior. The financial crimes are well documented. The emails discussing contingency scenarios for your incapacitation are borderline confession. Any jury in America would connect these dots. So what happens now? I am bringing this to my boss first thing tomorrow morning." Charlotte paused, and Emma could hear the smile in her voice. "Emma, we have got them. This is the kind of case that ends careers. Daniel and Lydia are going to prison for a very long time. I promise you that." Emma allowed herself to cry then, tears of relief streaming down her face in rivers she could not control. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in gasps. Months of fear and tension and uncertainty poured out of her in waves that felt like they might never stop. It was over. After weeks of hiding and planning and praying, it was finally going to be over. Daniel would be arrested. Lydia would be exposed. The world would see them for what they truly were, and Emma would be free to raise her daughter without looking over her shoulder, free to rebuild her life, free to become herself again. She slept peacefully that night for the first time in weeks. Deep, dreamless sleep that left her feeling almost human when she woke. Grace kicked happily in her belly, as if sensing her mother's relief, as if she knew that the danger was almost past. The nightmare was ending. The good guys were going to win. Justice would prevail. The call from Charlotte came the next morning at 7:15. Emma answered with a smile on her face, expecting good news, expecting to hear that the district attorney had approved the case, expecting to hear that arrest warrants were being prepared. But something was wrong. She could hear it in Charlotte's voice immediately. That flatness, that careful neutrality that lawyers used when they were about to deliver news they wished they did not have to share. "Charlotte? What happened?" There was a long pause, the kind of pause that felt like falling. "Emma," Charlotte said slowly, "I do not know how to tell you this. I really do not. But my boss shot it down." The words did not make sense. Emma heard them, but her brain refused to process them. "What? How? You said it was solid. You said we had them." "It is solid," Charlotte replied, and Emma could hear the frustration and anger and helplessness in her friend's voice. "The evidence is solid. That is not the problem." "Then what is the problem?" Charlotte paused again, and Emma could hear her struggling to find the right words. Words that would explain how the justice system could fail so completely. "Daniel's lawyer is Brad Thornton. Do you recognize that name?" Emma frowned. It sounded vaguely familiar. "Should I?" "Brad Thornton's father is Judge William Thornton, senior judge on the state appellate court, one of the most powerful men in the Connecticut legal system. He has been on the bench for 30 years. He has connections everywhere. Everywhere, Emma, and he called in every favor he had." Emma felt ice spreading through her veins. "What are you saying?" "I am saying the case has been buried." Charlotte's voice was heavy with regret. "Completely buried. My boss told me it was being deprioritized pending further review, but we both know what that means. It means it is never going to be reviewed. It means Daniel's lawyer made a phone call, and that phone call reached people who have the power to make problems disappear." Emma could not speak, could not breathe, could not think. "There is more," Charlotte continued, and her voice dropped to something that sounded almost like grief. "I am so sorry, Emma, but there is more. Tell me, Daniel has filed a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. He submitted it yesterday, right after his lawyer met with the judge. The timing is not a coincidence. He is arguing that your disappearance proves you are not capable of managing your own affairs, that your pregnancy has triggered some kind of psychological break, that you are a danger to yourself and to your unborn child." Emma felt the world tilt sideways. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, But even the solid wood felt unstable beneath her fingers. What happens if he succeeds? Charlotte answered slowly, each word landing like a blow. If he succeeds, he becomes your legal guardian. He gets control of your finances. He gets control of your medical decisions. He gets control of your inheritance the moment it activates. And when your baby is born, she could be taken from you and placed in his custody or his mother's custody. You would have no legal rights at all. The full horror of the situation washed over Emma like a wave of freezing water. She had evidence of financial crimes. She had evidence of a murder conspiracy. She had a pattern of suspicious deaths connected to Lydia Brennan that would make any reasonable person's blood run cold. And none of it mattered. None of it mattered because Daniel had better connections than she did. Because the people in power had decided to protect their own. Because the system she had once believed in was rigged against anyone who did not know the right people. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Emma felt completely and utterly defeated. Every path forward was blocked. Every ally was neutralized. Every hope was crushed beneath the weight of corruption and privilege. She had escaped her home. She had survived a blizzard. She had hidden for weeks while building what she thought was an airtight case. And none of it was enough. None of it would ever be enough. Daniel was going to win. He was going to take her inheritance. He was going to take her daughter. He was going to take everything she had left, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. Then Grace kicked, hard, insistent, demanding attention in that way babies have, even before they are born. Emma's hand flew to her belly, feeling the movement beneath her palm, feeling her daughter fighting to be acknowledged, fighting to remind her mother that she was there, that she was counting on Emma to protect her. And Emma realized something. Surrender was not an option. Not for her, not for Grace, not for any of the women Lydia had already killed. Not for any of the women Lydia would kill in the future if she was not stopped. If the system was rigged against her, she would find a way around the system. If traditional justice was not available, she would create her own justice. If the courts were corrupted, she would bypass the courts entirely. She had been a shark in the courtroom once, sharp and relentless, and absolutely ruthless when she needed to be. She had won cases that everyone said were unwinnable. She had faced down opponents who underestimated her and made them regret it. That woman was still inside her, buried beneath years of making herself smaller, buried beneath years of believing that being a good wife meant being quiet and agreeable, buried beneath layers of fear and self-doubt that Daniel had carefully cultivated. But she was still there, and it was time to let her out. It was time to remember what it felt like to be dangerous. The labor started 3 weeks early, as if Grace had decided she was done waiting, as if she knew her mother needed her strength more than ever. Emma woke in the middle of the night to pain that wrapped around her midsection like a vice made of fire. At first she thought it was another round of stress-induced contractions, the false alarms that had plagued her since Christmas Eve. Her body reacting to fear with tightening and cramping that felt real but always faded. But when the pain came again, 5 minutes later, stronger and more rhythmic, Emma knew this was different. This was real. This was happening. She managed to call out for help before the next contraction hit. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and tight and scared. Dr. Rose was at her side within minutes, still pulling on a robe, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She took one look at Emma's face, one touch of her belly, and nodded with calm certainty. "It is time," she said simply. "Your daughter is ready to meet you." The next 12 hours were the most intense of Emma's life. Dr. Rose had delivered hundreds of babies over her career, first in hospitals, where she had been one of the most respected OB-GYNs in Vermont, then in homes and safe houses, and places where women had nowhere else to turn. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her hands were steady, her voice was calm, her presence was a rock that Emma clung to through every wave of pain. The farmhouse had a fully equipped medical room for exactly this situation. Clean white walls, a proper hospital bed, monitors and equipment that had been donated by sympathetic doctors over the years. It was not as sophisticated as a major hospital, but it was safe. It was private, and most importantly, it would not expose Emma's location, because that was still the reality she was living in, even in labor, even bringing her daughter into the world. She was still hiding from a man who wanted her dead. So Emma labored in the safe house, surrounded by women who understood her situation in ways no hospital staff ever could. Jenny held her hand during the worst contractions, squeezing back whenever Emma squeezed. She did not flinch at the grip that left bruises. She did not look away when the pain made Emma scream. "I am here," Jenny kept saying. "You are not alone. You are so strong. You can do this." Martha brought cool cloths for her forehead, replacing them every few minutes as they warmed from Emma's fever-hot skin. She hummed old lullabies in a voice that cracked with emotion, songs she had sung to her own children decades ago. Even quiet Sarah came out of her shell, standing in the corner of the room with tears streaming down her face, whispering words of encouragement that Emma could barely hear but somehow felt. "You are going to be an amazing mother," Sarah said at one point. "Your baby is so lucky to have you." Between waves of pain, Emma's mind drifted to strange places, memories surfacing like bubbles from deep water. She saw her wedding day, the white dress she had spent months choosing, the flowers she had arranged herself because she wanted everything to be perfect, Daniel's smile as she walked down the aisle, a smile she now knew had been calculated from the very start. He had not been looking at her with love. He had been looking at her with satisfaction, another asset acquired, another piece of his plan falling into place. She saw her father's funeral, standing in black beside a grave that should not have been dug for another 30 years. Daniel's hand on her back supposedly offering comfort, but his mind had already been racing toward her inheritance. He had been counting down the days until her 35th birthday before her father was even cold in the ground. She saw the moment she gave up her career for him, the resignation letter she had written and rewritten a dozen times. The way Daniel had smiled and said it was her choice, of course. But would it not be nice to have more time together? Would it not be nice to focus on their relationship instead of billable hours? And she had believed him. She had actually believed that he wanted to spend more time with her. She saw 5 years of her life pass before her eyes, 5 years of making herself smaller, 5 years of apologizing for having opinions, 5 years of pretending not to notice when things did not add up, 5 years of believing that if she just tried harder, if she just loved better, if she just gave more, the marriage would finally work. Then she saw herself walking into that blizzard on Christmas Eve, 8 months pregnant and terrified, alone in the snow with nothing but a small bag and $500 and a phone number she had memorized years ago, choosing to survive against all odds, choosing her daughter over her fear, choosing herself for the first time in 5 years. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment she stopped being Daniel's victim and started being Grace's mother. "Emma," Dr. Rose said, her voice cutting through the pain and the memories, "I need you to push. One more push. You are almost there." Emma pushed with everything she had, every ounce of strength, every drop of determination, every bit of anger and fear and hope that had been building inside her for months. And then suddenly the room was filled with a sound that made everything else disappear. Her daughter's first cry. It was the most beautiful sound Emma had ever heard. Loud and furious and absolutely alive. A declaration of existence that seemed to shake the walls of the old farmhouse. Dr. Rose placed the baby on Emma's chest, a tiny, perfect creature with a surprising amount of dark hair and the strongest lungs Emma had ever heard. She was beautiful. She was healthy. She was real. Emma looked down at her daughter through tears that would not stop falling. Tears of exhaustion and relief and love, so overwhelming and it felt like it might split her open. "Hello, Grace," Emma whispered. "I have been waiting so long to meet you." The baby stopped crying almost immediately, as if recognizing her mother's voice. Her eyes, still unfocused and new to the world, seemed to search for Emma's face. Her tiny hand, smaller than Emma's thumb, wrapped around Emma's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside Emma. Something that had been broken finally healed. Something that had been dormant finally woke up. The fear that had dominated her thoughts for months began to dissolve like morning fog in sunlight. It did not disappear completely. She was still in danger. Daniel was still out there. The threats were still real, but the fear no longer controlled her, because now she had something stronger than fear. She had love. Fierce, burning, all-consuming love for this tiny person in her arms. This was what Daniel had wanted to take from her. Not just her money, Not just her sanity, not just her freedom, but her right to be a mother, her right to hold her daughter, her right to watch Grace grow up, her right to hear the words, "I love you, Mommy." He had wanted to steal this moment, this feeling, this perfect, precious beginning. He would not succeed. Emma made that promise silently, looking into her daughter's eyes. Whatever it took, whatever she had to do, whatever line she had to cross, she would protect this child with everything she had. She would build a life where Grace never knew the fear that her mother had lived with. She would make sure Daniel and Lydia paid for every moment of suffering they had caused. Not for revenge, not for justice, for Grace, for the little girl who was counting on her mother to be strong. The first week of Grace's life was a blur of feedings and changings and long sleepless nights that somehow felt like gifts rather than burdens. Emma fell in love with every tiny detail of her daughter. The way she curled her fingers into tiny fists when she was sleeping, the soft sounds she made when she was dreaming, little seizing coos that sounded almost like music. The surprising strength of her grip when she wrapped her hand around Emma's thumb and refused to let go. The way she smelled like milk and warmth and something uniquely her own. The way her whole body relaxed when Emma held her close. The way she seemed to know, somehow, that she was safe and loved and wanted. These moments were precious in ways that Emma could not have understood before becoming a mother. Every feeding was a meditation. Every diaper change was a chance to count tiny toes. Every sleepless night was an opportunity to sit in the darkness with her daughter and promise her the world. But even in those tender moments, Emma's mind was working, planning, strategizing. The lawyer in her never truly slept. She had been playing defense since Christmas Eve, reacting to Daniel's moves instead of making her own, running and hiding and hoping the system would protect her. That had to change. The system had failed her. The courts were corrupted. The people in power had chosen their own over justice. Traditional channels were blocked by connections and favors and the kind of privilege that money could buy. If Emma was going to win this fight, she would have to fight it on her own terms. She would have to be smarter than Daniel, more ruthless than Lydia, more willing to take risks than either of them expected. She would have to stop being a victim and start being a hunter. 3 weeks after Grace's birth, Emma gathered her team in the farmhouse living room. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. A fire crackled in the fireplace. Grace slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Maggie Sullivan sat on the couch, legal pads spread across the coffee table. Marcus Webb occupied the armchair by the window, his laptop open and ready. Charlotte Price had driven 6 hours to be there in person, despite the awkwardness that still lingered between them. And Dr. Rose Holloway stood near the door, the woman whose network had saved Emma's life and delivered her daughter into the world. These were the people who had kept Emma alive, the people who believed her when the rest of the world believed Daniel, the people who had risked their own safety and careers to help her. Now she was going to ask them to risk even more. Emma stood at the head of the room, her posture straight despite the exhaustion of new motherhood. Something in her had changed since giving birth. Something in her eyes that had not been there before. A hardness. A determination. The look of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "We cannot beat them in court," Emma said, her voice steady and calm. "We have tried that approach. We have evidence that should have put them away for life. But Daniel's lawyers have connections we cannot match. Judge Thornton has made sure our case will never see the inside of a courtroom. The system is rigged against us." She paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "So we have to destroy them outside the courtroom." The words hung in the air like smoke. Maggie's eyebrows rose slightly. Marcus leaned forward with interest. Charlotte's expression was unreadable. Dr. Rose simply nodded as if she had been expecting this moment. "The FBI hates local corruption," Marcus said slowly. "If we can get evidence directly to federal agents, bypassing the local DA entirely, we might have a shot. The Bureau has jurisdiction over financial crimes that cross state lines. Daniel's embezzlement definitely qualifies. I have contacts at the Bureau," Charlotte added. "People who would be very interested in a case involving a corrupt judge and a potential serial killer. But Marcus is right. We need more evidence. The stuff we have is good, but it is not bulletproof. A defense attorney could poke holes in it. We need something undeniable. something that proves intent beyond any reasonable doubt. So we get more evidence, Emma said, and I know exactly how to do it. Everyone looked at her expectantly. I am going to contact Daniel directly. Emma's voice did not waver. I am going to pretend that I have been broken, that hiding has exhausted me, that I am ready to come home and submit to whatever he wants. I am going to feed his ego until he thinks he has won completely. And then I am going to get him to confess to his crimes while I am wearing a wire. The room went silent. The fire crackled. Grace stirred in her sleep but did not wake. Marcus raised his hand with a skeptical expression that was half admiration, half disbelief. Quick question, he said, just so I understand the plan correctly. This involves you, who are currently legally classified as mentally incompetent, according to Daniel's lawyers, meeting face-to-face with Daniel, who wants you dead, while wearing a wire provided by federal agents, hoping that Daniel confesses to conspiracy to commit murder? That is correct, Emma said. Marcus looked around the room. Everyone nodded. Cool, Marcus said. Just wanted to make sure we were all aware that this plan is absolutely insane. Emma smiled grimly. It was the first time she had smiled since Charlotte's phone call. Desperate times require desperate measures. I was not criticizing, Marcus replied, and there was something like respect in his voice. Insane plans are my specialty. I once solved a case by pretending to be a pizza delivery guy for 6 weeks. Delivered actual pizzas and everything. Put on 30 pounds but caught a money launderer. But you need to understand the risks here, Emma. If something goes wrong, if Daniel suspects anything, if Lydia is smarter than we think she is, you could be in real danger, the kind of danger you cannot walk away from. I know, Emma said. She looked down at Grace, at her daughter's peaceful face and tiny hands, in the future she represented. But I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding. I cannot raise my daughter in safe houses and shadows. And I cannot let Daniel and Lydia get away with what they have done. Not just to me, but to those other women Lydia killed. They had families too, people who loved them, people who will never have answers if we do not find a way to stop her. Charlotte spoke softly. You really think Daniel will confess? He is not stupid. He knows how to cover his tracks. Daniel is not stupid, Emma agreed, but he is arrogant. He has always believed he is the smartest person in any room. And more importantly, he needs to be in control. He needs to win. If I give him what he wants, if I perform submission convincingly enough, he will not be able to resist explaining how clever he has been. He will want me to know exactly how thoroughly I have been defeated. That is his weakness, his ego. Maggie pulled Emma aside after the meeting ended, walking with her to the window where they could speak privately. When you face him, Maggie said carefully, knowing these words might save Emma's life, Daniel will try to destabilize you. He will make you doubt yourself. He will use every trick he knows to trigger the emotional reactions that used to give him power over you. The guilt, the shame, the desperate need to please him. You need to remember something. Maggie paused, making sure Emma was listening. Narcissists do not see people as humans. They see them as sources of supply, attention, validation, control. When you stop reacting emotionally to their provocations, you stop being useful to them. And that is when they make mistakes. That is when they reveal who they really are. When they think you are completely broken, completely under their control, they become careless. They say things they would never say otherwise. Emma nodded, storing the advice away in a mental vault labeled use when it matters most. I was married to a man like Daniel once, Maggie said quietly. A long time ago, before I learned what the signs looked like. I know how hard this is going to be. I know how tempting it will be to react, to fight back, to show him that he has not broken you. But that is not how you win this fight. You win by making him believe he has already won. You win by becoming invisible until the moment you are ready to strike. Emma looked at Maggie with new understanding. For the first time, she saw the pain behind the older woman's professional composure, the scars that had healed but never fully faded. Thank you, Emma said, for everything, not just the advice, for believing me when no one else did, for showing up when I needed you, for being the family that Daniel tried to take from me. Maggie's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. That is what family does, the real kind, the kind we choose. Emma turned back to the window, looking out at the snow-covered hills of Vermont. Somewhere beyond those hills, Daniel was celebrating his apparent victory, counting down the days until Emma's inheritance became his, planning a future that would be built on her grave. He had no idea what was coming. The trap was set. Now all Emma had to do was spring it. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Daniel loved. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, a menu with no prices because if you had to ask, you could not afford it. Every detail designed to project wealth and status and success. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a disguise she had crafted carefully over the past week. Her hair was shorter now, colored a subtle shade darker. Glasses she did not need gave her face a different shape. Conservative clothes in muted colors made her look like a different person entirely. She had lost the pregnancy weight quickly, partly from stress and partly from the nervous energy that came with planning the most important confrontation of her life. She looked like a ghost of the woman Daniel had married, which was exactly what she wanted. The wire taped to her ribcage felt heavier than its actual weight. Marcus had tested it 3 times, ensuring the signal was strong enough to reach the FBI surveillance van parked 2 blocks away. Charlotte had federal agents on standby. Maggie had emergency legal filings ready to submit the moment they had what they needed. Everything was in place, everything except Daniel. He arrived exactly on time, which was characteristic of his need for control. He spotted Emma immediately and crossed the restaurant with the concerned expression he had been practicing on television for weeks. The worried husband, the victim of circumstance, the man who just wanted his wife to come home. "Emma," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thank God you are safe. I have been so worried." The performance was impressive. If Emma had not seen those emails, if she had not spent weeks documenting his crimes, she might almost have believed him. "I know, Daniel," she said, keeping her voice small and defeated. "I am so sorry. I do not know what happened to me. The pregnancy, the stress, everything just became too much." Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. His touch made her skin crawl, but she forced herself not to pull away. "You do not need to apologize. You were confused. It was hormones, like I told everyone. The important thing is that you are okay now." Emma nodded, playing the role of the broken woman who had come crawling back. But inside, she was calculating, waiting, watching for the opening she needed. The conversation continued for 20 minutes. Daniel expressed relief and concern and love, all in the carefully measured tones of a man who had rehearsed every word. Emma responded with gratitude and shame and submission, feeding his ego exactly the way he expected. Then she made her move. "Daniel," she said hesitantly, "I need to ask you something. Before I left, I saw some things on your laptop. Messages, emails. I thought you were planning something terrible. But I must have misunderstood, right? The hormones were making me paranoid." Daniel's expression flickered. Just for a moment, she saw something cold behind his eyes. Then the mask returned. "You really were confused," he said smoothly. "That was just work stuff, boring corporate communications. But the emails about my inheritance," Emma pressed. "The discussions about what would happen if I became incapacitated." Another flicker, longer this time. "Your father's company would have been better managed by people who actually understand business," Daniel said, his voice tightening slightly. "I was protecting you. You are too soft for that world, Emma. You always have been." He was confessing. Partial confession, wrapped in condescension, but confession nonetheless. The wire was recording every word. Emma pushed further. "And Lydia? Was she protecting me too?" The name hung in the air like a knife. Daniel's face changed, the mask slipping further than he realized. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Hello, Emma. I had a feeling you would try something like this." Lydia Brennan stood beside their table, beautiful and cold and smiling in a way that made Emma's blood freeze. Lydia held up her phone. "I have been monitoring Daniel's communications for months. The moment you called him, I knew." "You really thought you were the smart one?" Emma's heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was not part of the plan, but the wire was still recording. The agents were still listening. She just had to keep them talking. Lydia signaled to 2 men near the bar. They approached the table with the quiet menace of professional security. "You are going to leave it with us now," Lydia said, her voice pleasant despite the threat in her words. "Quietly. Anything else and the world finds out that mentally unstable Emma Whitmore attacked her husband's colleague in public. Another nail in your competency hearing. Emma allowed herself to be led toward the back of the restaurant, through a door marked private, and into a room that looked like it was used for business meetings. The door closed behind them with a heavy click. In the confined space, Lydia's smile became predatory. "You really thought you could outmaneuver me?" Lydia laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. "I have been doing this for years, Emma. Your husband is just the latest in a long line of useful idiots who think they are in control." She began laying out her cards, confident in her victory. "First, your investigator, Marcus Webb. We detected his hack attempt on Daniel's server 3 days ago. I have documentation proving your team committed multiple felonies trying to access private data. If you do not cooperate, Marcus goes to prison." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Second, Lydia pulled up footage on her tablet, showing the farmhouse where Emma had hidden for weeks. "Dr. Rose's little sanctuary? We know where it is. We know where your daughter is." The chill became ice. Grace. They knew where Grace was. Third, Daniel stepped forward, emboldened by Lydia's confidence. "Here is how this works. You sign over your inheritance the moment it activates. You go to a treatment facility we have selected. Grace will be raised by my mother, and you disappear. For real this time." Emma looked between them. Two predators who had planned every move. Her daughter in danger. Her allies compromised. No cards left to play. Or so they thought. Emma's expression changed. Slowly, deliberately, she let the fear drain from her face. What replaced it was something neither Daniel nor Lydia had ever seen from her before. Confidence. "You are right about one thing, Lydia." Emma's voice was steady, calm, almost conversational. "You have been monitoring Daniel's communications, but you forgot something. I was a corporate lawyer before I was Daniel's wife. I know how to compartmentalize information." Lydia's smile faltered slightly. "The call I made to Daniel? That was not my first call. I have been in contact with the FBI for 2 weeks. Did you really think I would walk in here without backup?" On cue, the door burst open. Federal agents flooded into the room, weapons drawn, badges displayed. Lydia's face went pale. She tried to move toward the back exit, but an agent was already there, blocking her path. Emma continued, her voice rising with every word. "The server hack you detected? That was a decoy. The real evidence was collected from Daniel's office server 3 days ago, while you were watching the wrong location." Daniel started to sputter, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. "And the safe house footage you are so proud of? Dr. Rose evacuated 2 days ago. My daughter is with Maggie, 60 miles from where you thought she was. You have the address to an empty building." Lydia lunged toward Emma, all pretense of sophistication gone. 2 agents intercepted her before she could take 3 steps. Emma stood tall, looking at the 2 people who had planned to destroy her. "You wanted to take everything from me. My sanity, my child, my money, my life. But here is what you did not understand." She stepped closer to Daniel, close enough to see the terror in his eyes. "I spent 5 years dimming myself to make you comfortable. That woman was a performance. The real Emma Whitmore is a shark, and sharks do not lose to bottom feeders like you." Daniel Carter and Lydia Brennan were led away in handcuffs, their empire of lies crumbling around them with every step. The perp walk footage played on every news channel in America. Daniel Carter, once respected corporate executive, now accused of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen lesser charges. His expensive suit looked rumpled. His carefully styled hair was disheveled. His face wore an expression of stunned disbelief, as if he still could not comprehend how completely his world had collapsed. Beside him, Lydia Brennan looked equally devastated. Her designer clothes could not hide the reality of her situation. Her perfect composure had shattered the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She was facing charges not only for the current conspiracy, but for the suspicious deaths of her 2 previous husbands, cases that were being reopened with fresh eyes and damning new evidence. Emma watched the coverage from the living room of Maggie's home in Connecticut, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms. The weeks since the arrest had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and emotional processing. But now, finally, she could breathe. The charges against Daniel were extensive and well documented. The embezzlement alone would put him in prison for years. The conspiracy charges, combined with evidence of premeditation and Lydia's involvement, could add decades more. His company had fired him within hours of the arrest. His mother, Victoria, had publicly disowned him in a desperate attempt to protect her own social standing. Every friend and colleague who had once admired him now scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. He had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family, his future. All the things he had tried to steal from Emma were now being stripped from him with brutal efficiency. Marcus Webb texted Emma a screenshot from social media that made her laugh out loud for the first time in months. Lydia's Instagram account, once home to 2 million followers, had hemorrhage supporters at an astonishing rate. Her carefully curated image of luxury and success now felt like a cruel joke. Comments flooded every post with accusations and outrage. Her living my best life content is not hitting the same from county jail, Marcus wrote beneath the screenshot. Emma smiled and set down her phone. Grace stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds that meant she would want to eat soon. Such a simple thing, feeding her daughter. Such a profound thing, being present for it. 3 months ago, Emma had been a ghost in her own life, fading away inside a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. Now she was rebuilding. Every day brought new challenges, but also new joys. Grace was growing stronger. Emma was healing. The future that had seemed impossible was becoming real. Charlotte Price visited the following week. The awkwardness that had lingered between them since their falling out had finally begun to dissolve. "I tried to warn you about Daniel 5 years ago," Charlotte said as they sat together on Maggie's porch, watching Grace nap in a sunny corner. "I know," Emma replied. "I should have listened." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Would you have?" Emma considered the question honestly. "Probably not," she admitted. "I had to lose myself to find out who I actually was. Painful, but necessary." Charlotte nodded slowly. "The worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for who we become, if we let them, or they can bury us. The difference is choice." It was true. Emma had spent years being buried by Daniel's manipulation, by her own willingness to sacrifice her identity for a marriage that was never real. But the moment she walked into that blizzard on Christmas Eve, she had started choosing differently. Every step since then had been a choice: to survive, to fight, to reclaim what was hers. And now those choices were paying off. Emma's 35th birthday arrived on a crisp March morning, exactly 3 months after her disappearance. The birthday itself was quiet, celebrated with the small group of people who had become her true family: Maggie and Marcus, Dr. Rose and Charlotte, even Jenny and Martha from the safe house, who had both escaped their own situations and were building new lives. But the significance of the day was enormous. At midnight, Emma's inheritance officially activated. The trust her father had established decades ago transferred into her name, making her the sole owner of Whitmore Industries. $2.3 billion in assets, thousands of employees across multiple countries. A legacy that had been waiting for her to claim it. She had hidden from this inheritance for years, afraid that it would define her, that people would only see the money and not the person behind it. But she was done hiding, done diminishing herself, done being afraid. The following week, Emma walked into the headquarters of Whitmore Industries for the first time as its owner. She wore a simple but elegant suit, her hair styled professionally, her posture straight and confident. Grace was at home with a trusted caregiver, but Emma carried her daughter's photo in her pocket like a talisman. The board members who greeted her had varying reactions. Some were genuinely welcoming, having known her father and believing in her potential. Others were skeptical, having heard the media coverage and wondering if this supposedly unstable woman could really lead a billion-dollar company. Emma addressed them all with calm authority. "I know what some of you are thinking. You are wondering if I am capable of this role. You are wondering if the things my husband said about me were true. Let me be clear." She paused, making eye contact with each person at the table. "I am not the woman Daniel Carter described. I never was. What I am is the daughter of William Whitmore, who built this company from nothing into something that changes lives. I am a trained attorney with years of experience navigating complex situations. And I am a survivor who has just escaped a conspiracy designed to take everything from me." The room was silent. If I can survive what I have survived and come out stronger, imagine what I can do with the resources of this company behind me. Whitmore Industries is entering a new era. I intend to honor my father's legacy while building something even greater. Anyone who wants to be part of that journey is welcome. Anyone who does not can leave now, with my blessing. No one left. 1 year later, Christmas Eve arrived with a sense of peace Emma had not felt since childhood. The penthouse apartment overlooks Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the snow-covered trees and ice skating rink below. The living room was decorated with care but not excess. A tall tree sparkling in the corner, stockings hung above a modern fireplace, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. This time, Emma was not alone. Grace toddled across the carpet on unsteady legs, her dark hair bouncing with each step. She had grown so much in the past year, transforming from a fragile newborn into a determined little explorer who wanted to touch everything and taste half of what she touched. Marcus Webb sat on the floor nearby, playing some kind of game that involved stacking blocks and knocking them down, a process that Grace found endlessly hilarious. "Kid has got good instincts," Marcus said, as Grace grabbed an ornament from a low branch and attempted to eat it. He gently pried it from her fingers. "That angel is delicious looking." Maggie Sullivan laughed from her seat by the fireplace, a cup of hot chocolate warming her hands. "She is definitely a Whitmore, stubborn and fearless." Dr. Rose Holloway and Charlotte Price were there too, along with Jenny, who had become one of Emma's closest friends over the past year. The Farmhouse Network had helped Jenny build a new life, and now she was working as an advocate for other women escaping dangerous situations. The conversation flowed easily, filled with warmth and genuine connection. This was Emma's family now, not bound by blood or obligation, but by choice and shared experience. Every person in this room had helped save her life in some way. Emma stepped away from the group for a moment, moving to the window to watch the snow fall over the city. So much had changed in a year. So much had healed. Daniel was serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. The combination of financial crimes and conspiracy charges had resulted in a punishment that ensured he would never threaten Emma or Grace again. His appeals had been denied. His supporters had abandoned him. He would spend the prime of his life paying for what he had tried to do. Lydia Brennan was facing even worse. The investigations into her previous husbands had uncovered evidence of premeditated murder in both cases. She was looking at multiple life sentences, her beauty and charm worth nothing behind prison walls. Victoria Carter, Daniel's mother, had retreated from public life entirely, her social standing destroyed by association with her son's crimes. The society matriarch, who had once looked down on Emma, now lived in quiet disgrace. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, not completely, but substantially. The people who had tried to destroy Emma had been destroyed themselves. But more important than revenge was what Emma had built from the ashes. Whitmore Industries had flourished under her leadership. She had implemented programs supporting women in business, funding education and entrepreneurship initiatives across the country. She had restructured the company to prioritize ethical practices and sustainable growth. Her father would have been proud. Grace was thriving, a happy and healthy toddler who brought joy to everyone around her. Emma had worried that the circumstances of her birth, the stress and fear and uncertainty, would somehow affect her daughter. But Grace seemed to have inherited Emma's resilience, along with her father's determined nature, the good parts of Daniel before everything went wrong. And Emma herself had finally become the person she was always meant to be. Not Daniel's wife, not a woman hiding from her inheritance, not someone who dimmed her light to make others comfortable. She was Emma Whitmore, CEO and mother and survivor. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger on the other side. The party continued late into the evening. There was laughter and stories and too much food and exactly the right amount of wine. Grace eventually fell asleep in Emma's arms, her small body warm and trusting against her mother's chest. When the last guest had gone and the apartment was quiet, Emma carried Grace to her nursery and tucked her into her crib. She stood watching her daughter sleep for a long moment, overwhelmed with gratitude for this life they had built together. Then she returned to the living room to clean up the last of the party supplies. Her phone buzzed with a notification, an encrypted message from an unknown number. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she opened it. The message read, Congratulations on your victory. Lydia was never the real threat. She was just a tool. I've been watching you for years, Emma. Your father's death was not natural. And now that you have proven yourself worthy of the Whitmore name, the real game begins. See you soon, W. Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Her father's death, not natural. She had always accepted the official story. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected but not suspicious. William Whitmore had worked himself to exhaustion building his empire. His heart had given out. Tragic but understandable. But now someone was out there, someone who had orchestrated events Emma had not even known were connected. Someone who had been testing her, watching her, waiting to see if she would prove herself worthy. Worthy of what? Emma looked toward Grace's nursery where her daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the new threat that had just emerged. 1 year ago, Emma had been a pregnant woman fleeing into a blizzard, alone and terrified and fighting for survival. She had faced that challenge and won. She had faced Daniel and Lydia and won. She had rebuilt her life from nothing and created something beautiful. Whatever was coming next, she would face it too, because she was Emma Whitmore, and Whitmores did not lose, but they did have enemies. Emma deleted the message and set down her phone. Tomorrow she would call Marcus and Maggie and Charlotte. She would start investigating. She would uncover whatever conspiracy had been hiding in the shadows of her life. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, she allowed herself one more moment of peace. She walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling over Manhattan. The city sparkled with lights. Families gathered in warm homes. Children dreamed of presents waiting under trees. Somewhere out there, a mysterious figure was watching, planning, waiting. But Emma was not afraid. She had already survived the worst nightmare of her life. Whatever came next, she would handle it the same way she had handled everything else. With intelligence, with determination, with the fierce protective love of a mother who would do anything to keep her daughter safe. The snow continued to fall, soft and silent and beautiful. And Emma Whitmore Carter, once a victim, now a victor, stood ready for whatever the future would bring. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one was just beginning, and that is where our story ends for today. But remember, the message from W means this nightmare might just be beginning. If Emma's journey gave you chills, if you found yourself holding your breath during those final moments, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Emma's shoes? Would you have walked into that blizzard? Or would you have stayed and fought a different way? And if you want to be here when we uncover who W really is and what really happened to Emma's father, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because in this world, the people who seem the weakest are often the ones you should fear the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay smart, and never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose.